Hello everyone and welcome to Merlin's Manor. Today I'm giving my thoughts on The Adventures of Robin Hood, which is a cooperative scenario game which tells a story as you play. It plays 2 to 4 players and you can choose to play multiple characters each at the lower player counts or just leave out 1 to 2 characters. My wife and I played through the campaign playing 2 characters each so that we could play all 4 characters, and it played very well in that manner. Let's go ahead and start out before I can get into my thoughts on the game with a brief gameplay overview. Now, each scenario gives you a puzzle to solve. You have to figure out who you need to interact with or what you need to do in order to solve the problem at hand. You'll pull out wooden circles from a bag to indicate whose turn it is, and you'll use wooden figures to move along the board, and you'll have it set up to where you are going to use these to move along. And if you do not use your long path, which is this one here, then you will get a white cube that you can put into the bag for saving strength. And then you can attack guards or noblemen or pass certain tests, which will require you to pull cubes from a bag and generally get 2 out of 3 pulls being white cubes in order to win that test. A certain amount of purple and white cubes start out in the bag, and there will be things that cause purple cubes to go into the bag, making it harder to be successful. So you're going to want to put more white cubes in as much as possible. But you also don't want to take too much time getting around the board. There is a red circle in the bag, and when that gets pulled out, it's going to have some negative things that are going to happen, including advancing time. If you run out of time, then you lose the game. Also, when you pull the red circle, you're going to flip certain guards and noblemen that are listed on a circle that you are going to pull out of the bag as well at that time. Any guards that are flipped up at this point, either freshly being flipped face up or already face up and not getting flipped turned back over, will then cause any player in that same region of the board to get captured, and time will be lost due to this. Shadowy areas on the board are safe, and so you might want to find yourself into those shadowy areas. You also lose time if hope ever gets to 0. You can increase hope by taking out guards and noblemen. You need to complete your objective before you run out of time. As you interact with the board, you'll be reading various things from a storybook. Typically, another player will read a prompt, and the player interacting with the board at that time will have a choice to make that will affect what happens next. These are the basics of how the game is played. Anything else I could add would include spoilers, so I will leave it at this. Let's get into the game review itself now, starting with art and components. The board is very interesting with pieces that you are going to be flipping over as they come available and after interacting with them in order to show that they are no longer available. It does get very fiddly pulling out and flipping those cardboard pieces, and does potentially add to some wear to the cardboard components that sit into the board. The wooden components are good quality, some good chunky pieces here. I find the path characters to be very interesting as well, and how they interact with the board as far as how you make that path. The book itself is very nice, and it adds a great amount to the storybook feel of the game. It includes bookmarks to help you refer back to important information on a current scenario. The bag you draw from is a bit cheap, and we actually had to re-sew the bottom as it started to become unstitched and cubes would fall out. It's also a little awkward because everything goes into the same bag. Turn tokens, cubes, thin circular cardboard tokens that list those guards and noblemen that are flipped. You just have to fish around to find the particular thing you're looking to draw at the time. Some of the cardboard pieces feel a little thin and cheap, but they are functional for slotting into the board, and so they kind of need to be kind of thin for that purpose. Now let's talk about ease of access. The game is pretty easy to learn and play, and it teaches you as you go, introducing new concepts throughout the game so that players are not overwhelmed with too much to learn at the start. A lot of the difficulty comes in figuring out what you're going to do in various scenarios, as the game doesn't hold your hand as far as what you need to do in order to accomplish the task. Now let's talk about gameplay. The game has some rather unique gameplay elements to it. The way you move around the board by lining up your player pieces, and that indicates how far you can travel. It does get a bit fiddly and sometimes leaves judgment calls as to whether you are able to make it where you need to be, and if you can pass a certain area based on the art that's on the board, and you can't pass through certain things. And it's like, well, am I kind of going through that area, or am I just skirting beside it? And it can also be annoying when another player is in the way and you have to go around, and especially if you're unable to go around because of a narrow path where you can't fit 2 or 3 characters in that same path at the same time. There is a lot of luck involved in the game, as accomplishing various tasks requires you to pull out 2 successes out of 3, and some player abilities later on in the game will make this a little bit easier. You also will do some actions hoping to cull the purple cubes to make successes more likely later on in the game, especially since you start out with many more purple cubes in those later scenarios than white. And really, you're always starting out with more purple than white, if memory serves me correctly there. And sometimes you'll have pulled out 2 purples, and so you've definitely failed the task at hand, and you're left deciding if you want to pull a third one, hoping to cull yet another purple. But it might just turn out to be a white cube, and so you've wasted a white cube in that situation. There's an interesting push and pull when it comes to traveling, as you need to get to places as quickly as possible, but you also want to save strength so you can add a white cube as often as possible. But do this too much, and you might find yourself not being quite able to get where you want to be on the future turns, or even running out of time. You also want to try to end up in the shadows as often as possible to avoid guards potentially catching you if that red circle comes out and flips a guard in the region that you are in. There can be a bit of pushing your luck as you go and fight guards in the open and get stuck with them there if you fail, or just being out in the open rather than ending up in the shadows. There's a degree of strategy mixed in with taking chances and hoping for the best. You have to balance keeping hope up so you don't lose extra time, but also focusing on the task at hand so that you complete the objective in time. You can't just spend the entire game fighting guards and noblemen. There's a lot of tension throughout the game. Pulling the red circle at the wrong time can be devastating, but then again, it can be very satisfying when the right turn comes up, or when the red circle gets pulled at the most opportune time while everyone is in the shadows, or early on in the round, so you know you've got the rest of the round to be safe. The game can be very difficult when luck of the draw doesn't go your way in key times during the game. The time can be very tight, and if you have too many things that don't go well, then you're going to lose. But if you do lose, then you can reset and play a second version of the chapter, which has different places that you need to go at times, so that you don't have pre-knowledge of all the places that you need to go and what exactly needs to be done from your previous playthrough, though with some similarities as well. There's also an easier mode, which gives you an extra turn each round. We did ourselves invoke the easier mode in the later chapters, as they seem very punishing. Let's talk about theme now. The storybook theme comes through with the use of an actual storybook that you are reading from, and you're making decisions as you go. You also get a sense of exploring around the board and interacting with different people and items, and having to figure out who you need to talk to or where you might find a certain thing that brings you into the adventure itself. I really enjoyed that Robin Hood theme and the play on the unique take on the story as well. There are familiar pieces to the story that you experience, as well as twists on the typical storyline as well, to give you a different story with that same feel, though. This game feels thematic in its gameplay. Now, as it comes to replayability, the game has several chapters, and you may find yourself replaying a few of them along the way if you lose those chapters. And after the campaign is completed, it offers you a second way to play through the game, which changes things up. There's also an expansion that will add a little bit more of gameplay. But beyond the 2 playthroughs and playing the expansion scenarios, I do not see this game getting much more plays. I would estimate the average group might get about 20 plays out of the base game if you play through the campaign twice and have a few repeats of chapters due to losses along the way. I doubt anyone would want to go through again, as a big part of the pull of this game is that discovering the story and figuring out the puzzles of what needs to be done. And once you've solved all those, just going through isn't going to be as satisfying. The gameplay by itself would not keep me coming back after experiencing the story and knowing what exactly needs to be done. In fact, after a single playthrough, I doubt we're going to be coming back to it for a second alternate playthrough, mainly just because I have so many different campaigns that I want to get to and focus on. There's also a single divergence in the storyline that could offer an alternate storyline for replayability as well. I don't know how different that alternate storyline would feel and if it would be enough to provide yet another third playthrough. Now for my final thoughts. I enjoyed a single playthrough of this game. It was definitely a positive experience that I'm glad to have had. The storyline is interesting, and figuring out what you need to do adds this interesting puzzle to solve for each scenario. The gameplay could be frustrating at times as it really felt like the odds were against you, especially scenarios that you took a little while to figure out what you needed to do and ones that required winning a test before you could proceed on towards completing the objective. It does take a hit on replayability. Some will play through the campaign once and be done with it. At most, I would say you'd get 2, maybe 3 playthroughs of the campaign before you're going to be ready to move on, as that main pull is figuring things out and experiencing the story. I do rate the game a 7.5 out of 10 as it was a very enjoyable experience. There was some fiddliness in the gameplay, both from the movement of characters as well as in flipping cardboard tokens on the board, which might be a bit much for some. Also, the amount of luck involved between when certain tokens come out, which guards attack, and drawing of cubes in order to win tests or fights could turn some away from this game. If you enjoy story-based cooperative games and don't mind a little fiddliness and a good amount of luck and feeling that the game sometimes can be really rough, then I can recommend this game for at least 1 playthrough, maybe 2. And if you play it at 2 players, I would recommend going ahead and controlling 2 characters apiece to really experience the fullness of the game, and it really doesn't add that much to try and control 2 characters. And perhaps even at 3 players, you might have someone control an extra character or work together on what that 4th character does in order to just use all the different characters. I hope this review has helped you decide if this is a game that you would enjoy or not. If you found this review helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to see more of my reviews, playthroughs, and other board game videos, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Here are a couple other videos that you can check out, and I hope you have a great weekend and get to enjoy some great board games.